So there we go. Got it started. Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce, I guess, kind of our board members and the folks who are on the call with us as we get started. So I'm Sarah Beth Urban. I'm the chair of Cleveland Park Neighborhood Association. Justin, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, Justin Jackson, co-chair of the Neighborhood Association.
JP?
Hey, JP Urban. I'm secretary of the organization. This is James, Sarah Beth, and my son.
Frank?
Hey, I'm Frank. I am the treasurer of the Neighborhood Association.
Great. Russell? You're on mute.
Russell, you'll need to hit *6 or *6 in order to unmute your phone.
Sarah Beth, can you force unmute him?
Oh, no.
I can. There
we go.
Russell, if you're there and want to talk, you can talk.
I can talk now.
Yes.
I'm here, apparently.
Yeah,
we see your
introduce
name.
yourself.
Oh, Russell Kirchner, Sergeant at Arms, Beautification Commissioner of District 5.
Great, awesome. So that is our board for Cleveland Park. I also want to introduce Jim. You want to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about Neighbor to Neighbor?
Sure. My name is Jim Hawk. I'm executive director of Neighbor to Neighbor. We have Neighbor to Neighbor was founded and is led by neighborhood leaders from across Davidson County. We equip residents and neighborhood organizations really with the tools they need in order to preserve and improve their neighborhoods. We last year worked with residents in over 117 neighborhoods across the metropolitan area to help them in the efforts that they're trying to have happen in their own neighborhoods. I want to talk about 3 things that I want as opportunities that anybody can participate in the coming year that I thought would be important. The first one is beginning in the end of July, we have a 3-part neighborhood transit institute that's going to be taking place. Transit's a huge issue in this city. And the last time that we went through this, neighborhood organizations told us that they had a difficult time walking through the plans and trying to help their neighbors walk through the plan. So what we're doing now is we're gathering all the key players in the transit discussion together so that neighborhood leaders can hear firsthand from them how the plans are developed and what they're hoping to accomplish. The second thing is most neighborhoods say that they have a real difficult time effectively engaging in metro planning and zoning issues. So in October, we are going to have our first class ever for the planning school. And it is a 4-part series that we'll be leading that actually helps anybody who wants to understand the metro and zoning planning and zoning process really understand and be more effective and engaging. I will urge you to watch out for an announcement about that because due to COVID-19, only 12 people will be selected across Davidson County for the first class. Following that first class, we hope to ramp it up, but there'll only be 12 for that first class. And then the last thing is, I don't know if you can, behind me is what's your neighborhood passion? We are going to begin this fall what we call the Neighborhood Passions Network. And we're gathering residents from across Davidson County to talk about issues that they're passionate about that are occurring in their neighborhood. So a couple that are real common. One is, of course, crime reduction and prevention. Another passion circle is going to be around beautification and the environment. But there's 8 of those that we've identified thanks to some of our partners that are really important for different residents. And so we're going to be rolling those out. And again, first online, anybody at all can participate in those conversations. So be watching for that as well. Thanks.
Great. Well, and thank you. Jim's actually hosting our meeting today. So thanks to Neighbor for having this account so that we can sign on. We also have 2 of our elected officials on here today, Representative Harold Love and Councilman Sean Parker. Representative Love, do you want to give us an update from what's been going on up at the legislature?
Thank you so much, and I do apologize for some of the background noise. I'm actually about to head back up to the Capitol. We have been in budget negotiations since about 10 o'clock this morning. And so, as you know, in the General Assembly, the House and the Senate versions must match. If they don't match, you have a conference committee that is formed, and myself and Senator Gilmore are actually on the conference committee. Very fortunate for us both to be on there. Anybody from across the state could have been chosen, but we are going to be on the conference committee to kind of hash the differences. We are just dealing with what so many other states are dealing with, which is trying to adjust our budgets in light of the COVID-19 shutdowns, and realizing that even though Metro Nashville has received $121 million in CARES Act money, that money does have strings attached to it. You can only use it for expenses that are COVID-19 related, and we're not in your city's budget prior to that. I bring that point up because as people, and the councilman can talk about that also, they talk about CARES Act money, it's not as simple as folks think it is. The state got $2.3 billion, but the city got $121 million. And Nashville's fortunate because of our population. Only Nashville and Memphis got money directly to those cities themselves. And so other cities and counties must rely upon the state to try to make them whole. So I raise that point because we passed a budget in March and set this June date to come back and make adjustments. We're still waiting on sales tax returns to see what we collected in June and in April and May to give us an estimate of what we'll have to do to finish out this particular fiscal year. We've tried to pass some good legislation this year, but also realizing that legislation oftentimes has a fiscal impact to it. It costs to implement those programs. So many of the bills we wanted to pass, we weren't able to pass. Also realizing that many of our colleagues have been away from home longer than they would have expected to have been. So getting them back home is important also as we talk about getting this budget wrapped up. So we'll probably be here hoping for another hour tonight after we go back into the conference committee report. But that's the news from Capitol Hill. We are certainly trying to also make sure that we are cognizant of issues facing our country and our state when it comes to issues of social justice and racial equity. And so much of what we are discussing now, we'll try to implement and some things in the fall and some legislation in the spring of next year. I have a couple of bills that we're going to look at to try to bring some equity and some fairness to both sides of the equation. So I'm open for questions if anybody has any.
Anybody have any questions?
I do have one. Can any of that money be used to help people offset some of their taxes with the property tax increase? Some people have, were laid off. Some people haven't gone back to work yet. It's going to probably put a hardship out there for quite a few people that I know of over here in District 5 and 7 and 6. Could any of that money be used in some type of a program to help them offset the high property taxes?
So the state has two programs, property tax relief and property tax freeze programs. I would encourage you to contact property assessor Vivian Wilhoit to see if you qualify for those programs, or if you know of someone that has those issues, to also contact her. I will say this as an addendum: we had some money set aside in the state budget, about $30 million for tornado relief, and that money was to specifically be used to help pay the city and the state's portion of the match for FEMA support. But we were able to have enough volunteer support from Nashville and other places to have saved some of that money. We're working right now. I think we have about $9 million left. We're working right now to see if we can use some of that money to help offset the property taxes of houses that were affected by the tornado. And by that I mean the city is not in a place, I think, to collect those taxes because of the damage. But we don't want the city to fall short from their own revenues by not being able to collect all those taxes. So it'd be a situation, if we get it passed, we possibly can get some money to the city for those property taxes, those particular houses that were damaged in the tornado. And that's one thing we're working on right now.
That's good. I talked to one of those people just yesterday. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Sean, did you have a follow-up?
I do have a little bit more to say about that. I can save that for, I know that I'd love. Might have to go here in a sec, but I wanted to ask, do you have any idea when we'll get the revenue projections from sales revenue numbers from April, May, and June?
I'm sorry, say that again. I'm sorry.
The sales tax revenue numbers from April, May, and June. Do you know when we might get those?
I think we have the numbers for April and May, and I can verify that tonight. But I think that's why we stayed so late in June. Just historically, we would have been out of session by mid-April and been working off estimates for May and June for our budget. But because of the reduction in our sales tax receipts, we came back in June with the expectation. Now, a lot of the businesses were given the opportunity to delay in paying their taxes until April. I mean, from April until June. So hopefully we should have those numbers for April and May already.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I would encourage you to let people know that if they, and I think I sent to the group that we did have a small business stimulus portion of $200 million for businesses that did pay state sales tax, and they don't have to apply for that. It's an automatic generating thing, but I would encourage them to go into the link to the Department of Revenue and to just verify their address and either update it if it's changed. That way they have your address to send you the check. It's not a lot of money, but it's some money for businesses that were closed or had a reduction in their sales during the COVID-19 shutdown.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate the update from you. And thanks for being on the call today. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Sean, do you want to provide council update for us?
Sure. Yeah, and thank y'all so much for inviting me here. Council's had a busy 3 weeks. We've had 3 meetings this month. The first was the public hearing on the budget, which y'all might have heard. You know, we had public comments going into 5 o'clock in the morning at that meeting, and then we had a meeting to kind of clear out a bunch of zoning bills that had backed up and whatnot. And then last night we had our budget debate, and we passed a budget, and we were there until 4:30 in the morning and didn't even finish our calendar. I was one of the very tired council members pushing for us to finish our calendar, but we didn't get there. So the budget discussion was really robust. You know, there were 2 viable options on the table, and that was the mayor's budget proposal, which included a full dollar increase in the tax rate, substantial tax increase, about 32%. And then the budget chair's substitute budget was slightly higher. It was 6 cents higher, another percentage point or 2 in terms of increase. And the council wound up with the budget chair's substitute, which is slightly higher. I think that for most homeowners, it would amount to, $3 or $4 a month in difference between the mayor's proposal. And it accomplishes, I'm probably going to publish a breakdown of what the differences between the mayor's proposal are and what the substitute with all the amendments we passed accomplishes. It restored funding to a lot of programs that we know are effective. It had included some really overdue pay raises for some Metro Schools people. Now we're going to have all paraprofessionals and non-certified teachers, all support staff in MNPS are going to be making at least $15 an hour, which, that doesn't sound like a whole lot these days, but people have been making less than that working in our schools, keeping our kids educated. So the 15, I think, is something to kind of be proud of there. We were not able to deliver step increases for Metro employees, unfortunately. That was kind of probably the most contentious amendment of the night. That was a priority for the administration to have that particular amendment pass, and it passed. And yeah, I to speak a little bit to what Representative Love was talking about, or the question that Sam McCullough asked Representative Love, in terms of property tax relief. The reason I'm so interested in these revenue projections, these sales revenue projections, most of this tax increase was a result of needing to fill a hole that really dire sales tax revenue projections left in the city budget. So, back when COVID really was ramping up and businesses were beginning to close, we adjusted our revenue projections and said, oh my gosh, we have to cut a ton of stuff out of the budget and we have to raise taxes all at the same time. And so that's what the mayor's proposal did. The numbers we have from March are better than anticipated. And it's possible that April, May, June end up better than anticipated, which is going to allow us, the council has committed by resolution to revisiting the property tax rate that was set along with the chair's substitute budget. We've committed to revisiting that in August. And if sales tax revenue actuals are better than our dire projections, we are hoping to be able to lower that tax rate some. I don't know how much, but we're hoping to be able to lower it. In addition, several of us on the council are hoping to be able to use some of this CARES Act funding to provide relief to households that have been impacted by COVID. We probably can't steer it into a property tax relief program just because that's not really what we're allowed to do with the money. But mortgage assistance, rental assistance for households that have been impacted by COVID, that is well within the scope of what we're allowed to do with the money. And I don't really know of a household in Davidson County that hasn't been impacted by COVID, so I don't know what those parameters would have to look like for us to be able to do that. But the mayor is pretty much in the driver's seat on how we use the COVID money, but he has committed to working with the council on it. And there are several of us who are pushing for some programs like that would provide sort of direct relief to households in the. So that's about all I got right now. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Doesn't look like it. All right. Well, thanks for the update, Sean. Appreciate you signing on today. So now we're going to turn it over. Actually, I guess Sergeant Fisher and Commander, do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is David Emhoff. I'm the commander of the East Precinct, and on July 1st, I think it'll be 9 years at East. So 27 on the department, 9 at East.
And I'm Sergeant Fisher. I'm the Community Affairs Sergeant for the East Precinct, and I've been here with Metro for 18 years.
And for those of you, if you haven't made to one of our meetings in person, one of these two guys is always at our meetings providing a crime report update for us from the previous month. So we get a lot of interaction with them, and we really appreciate y'all's time today coming on to hear some of the questions from our neighbors. Justin Jackson, my co-chair, actually was the one who collected those. So I'm gonna turn it over to you so you can read those out loud for the recording, and then we'll do a discussion. If you've got questions kind of as we go, I guess if you want to use the chat box, there's not too many folks on here, so it's not too big of an issue if you want to jump in and ask a question, but we will have time for that at the end as well. So Justin, take it away.
Alrighty. So yeah, as a reminder, we've collected these questions for the past 2 weeks, and I went ahead and I grouped them into categories just to make the answers a bit easier. So I have numbers and statistics. I have community relations, accountability, and budgets. So I start from the top. Question number 1. Can officer stats be broken down by how many of each type of arrest they make?
And Mike and I will just go back and forth on this depending on the question, but do we keep that at the precinct? No. can I look up at the precinct level how many arrests an officer may make, but it won't be broken down. If I want to find that out, I can go to strategic development, which is an internal unit within the police department, to get an actual breakdown of the type of offenses that that they're charging people with. But I don't have access to that myself at the precinct.
Okay. There was only question that was related to numbers and stats. So move on to community relations. Are there any events that let us meet officers on personal level, especially a safe space for the POC in our community?
And since Mike's our community coordinator, I'll let Mike jump on that one.
Yeah, so the commander and I attend a little over 300 meetings every year. Every community meeting we attend, so your neighborhood, any neighborhood that does a community meeting each month, we make sure somebody's there to represent the precinct. Plus, we do a weekly crime lunch. If you think back, like historically, every year for the Easter event, where Cleveland Park, McFerrin Park, Highland Heights, everybody gets together, we always attend those. When we get an invite to the Christmas parties, we're there for those. So absolutely. And then if anybody in the community ever wants to have a one-on-one sit down with us, all they got to do is reach out, and we're always happy to discuss any kind of issue, concern, or need from the neighborhoods.
Awesome.
And normally y'all have night out against crime too, right? I know
Correct.
that's not happening this year.
Right.
Yeah, we've had Night Out Against Crime. Well, for as long as I've been here, Mike and I have put on our own event the last 2-3 years over at the East Park. And I would say the folks that know us, that has been around for a while, if you ask us to come to something, we show up.
Yep.
You know, if anything you've asked us to participate in, we show up. We also, I know Sam has called me before with issues, and he's come to the precinct. We've sat down and talked about them. If we get asked to go somewhere, I've always said, if you call, we'll come. So anytime you want us someplace, we've had coffee with a cop. The last 2 times we've done that has been on Dickerson Road. One was at the coffee place next to Goodwood, Retrograde Coffee, I believe.
Yep.
And then we did over at Sugar High too. We went there as well for that. And like Mike said, we have a weekly meeting at 11 o'clock every Thursday. Now we haven't had it since the pandemic started, but you know, either Mike, myself, or somebody would always be at that to field questions. And we also do a lot of stuff over the last few years in Casey Place, with our community engagement team, where we've developed different activities such as the sidewalk art chalk competition over there, and walk with a cop program. So, and we've been greeters at the school on Fridays. So, you know, there's various things that we've done. But again, if there's something you want us to come to, call us. We'll be there.
Awesome. All right, next question. What ways can we help you to protect our community residents and residents' property?
I would say the thing that we've constantly talked about over the years is, one, participating in meetings like this, getting involved in your communities, getting involved with your community associations, calling us, being engaged, getting to know your neighbors, talking to one another, getting to know the people in your neighborhood, communicating with each other, educating each other, and then getting information from us. We've talked about a lot of times, you don't have to wait until your community meeting to find out what's going on in your neighborhood. If something was happening down the street and you want to know, hey, I want to know what happened, you can call Sergeant Fisher, you can call myself, we'll research it for you. You don't have to wait a month before you get that information. But I think the biggest thing is plugging in, getting educated, and getting involved. Mike, I don't know if you have anything on top of that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add was just, man, we couldn't beg more for you guys to blast our email contacts out there to the neighborhoods, because like the commander was saying, that we don't want folks to have to wait for meetings. I mean, people need to reach out to us on a daily basis, and I do. I field so many emails. The commander fields so many emails and phone calls day in, day out. And we're really good about getting back to folks within 24 hours of contact. So when people in the community have got an issue, question, or concern, let us know. And more importantly, it's really important that information gets out there that folks can be anonymous. Because I think one of the biggest barriers we have is that people don't want to reach out to us because they're afraid of any kind of conflict, that they've reached out to the police and they don't want any kind of retribution for that. So we beg you to put that out there to your neighbors. You can always contact us. You can remain anonymous, and whatever question, issue, or concern you've got, we can address without bringing you into the mix.
Got it. Okay. Is there any diversity and cultural awareness training for officers?
Mike, do you want to hit that one, or you want me to hit it?
I can hit it. So if you look at our, and I'm gonna email this to Sarah. Every officer training that goes through our police academy, if you look at what the state requires for interpersonal communications or professional and ethical conduct and human relations, we almost double a lot of that. So human relations, which would be applicable here, the state requires that academies instruct 30 hours of that. Nashville does 59. Interpersonal communications, they require 25 hours of that training. We do 38. And then if you do the professional and ethical conduct, the state only requires 3 hours. We do almost 8 hours of that. So, and that's also implemented in our yearly
in-service training.
In-service training that everybody's got to do year in, year out.
Yeah, when we look at the training for our recruits as well as our in-service training, there's a section, as Mike said, in human relations, and we require 59 hours of that, where the state requirements are 30. Within that, just to take a look at it, civil rights history in Nashville is 2 hours, diversity and inclusion is 2 hours, fair and impartial policing is 8 hours, law enforcement response to mental illness is 12 hours, including 4 hours of reality-based training. And the mobile diversity seminar, the bus tour, which is 8 hours. And what that is, and I'm going to read this to you so you just have a better idea, is the emphasis on learning different cultures of the communities of Nashville, to include but not limited to Hispanic community, Muslim community, gay and lesbian community, strong emphasis on understanding the community's perspective of police, whether the perspective is positive or negative. And we've been doing this bus tour and this diversity training for several years. In fact, I think the first year we did diversity training was when I was in the academy, which was 1993. That was the very first year they started diversity training. And we've had it every year since then.
Awesome. All right, next question. I would like to know what steps MNPD is taking to cooperate with the COB. So I believe it's a community oversight board.
Sure. Now, to be completely honest and transparent, I'm not part of those conversations. So I can only tell you from the little bit of knowledge that I have. I know they're an independent elected board. And in other words, it was a referendum to enact the board. So they're their own entity. They're not part of the police department. So I know there's an MOU now. I know Deputy Chief Mike Hager works with them on a regular basis and sits down with them. And whatever, to my knowledge, what they've asked us for, we've provided through our records. There's been numerous requests through our records division, which I know Captain Newbern, and before that was Captain Blair, had gave them those things. I know there's been a lot of talk, like at the last, I think, officer-involved shooting at a domestic where the suspect in that case was shot in the hand. There was some talk that they weren't allowed in the crime scene, but there's some things we can't allow based on state law. And in fact, Kathy Morante, who's the director of our Office of Professional Accountability, which for layman's terms is internal affairs, she didn't go in the crime scene either. So I know she waited outside the crime scene along with the COB. But like, they're their own entity, we're our own entity. I know they've been taking cases since April of last year, citizens' complaints on officers. And I know they've been taking cases since April of last year. At this point, there hasn't been any findings of any wrongdoing by any officers from their investigations. There hasn't been any reports to the chief to make recommendations or sanctions on any officers from their investigations. So that's the only information I have regarding that. Again, like I said, I'm not part of those conversations, and I haven't personally worked with the COB in any way, shape, or form.
Got it. Okay, next question. Does MNPD have a plan to better diversify the force?
That's a great question. We have been working on diversifying the force for years and years. It's just, it's tough. When we're looking at minority candidates, female candidates, they're in demand. And we're in competition with every law enforcement agency in the country, as well as federal agencies, as well as private entities. When I first became on the police department, I think there were something like 3,000 people that were trying to get 60 jobs. That's just not the case anymore.
Nope.
You're just not seeing that big demand. There's not a lot of people that want to do this job right now, just to be honest with you. And to try to recruit a more diversified, we go to the historically black colleges and universities. We've done citizen academies, citizen training academies with TSU. We've been with several different organizations. See, I had a couple of those listed here, but yeah, we've been involved with 100 Black Men, 100 Kings. We work with TSU. We've gone to those historically black colleges and universities. It's just tough, and it's just tough because it's hard to find people that want to do this job, and tough because when you do find very qualified candidates, just overall qualified candidates, it's hard to attract them to this profession right now. And we're also competing, since there's such a small pool, with every different law enforcement agency in the country.
I would add to that as a community in a neighborhood, if you know anybody in your neighborhood that's remotely interested in law enforcement, tell them to come to the precinct. Commander and I are always happy to sit down with folks and give them just fast, hard facts about what it's like to police in Nashville. And the opportunity to recruit folks that are local is ideal for us.
All right, the next question is a bit long, so here we go. It can obviously be a dangerous act for a citizen to interfere in a police action or arrest for the citizen, suspect, and officer. In light of this, what could bystanders have done to intervene on Floyd's behalf? Not blaming them for not doing this, just wondering what could be done without getting hurt in the future, while also taking into account that every situation is different.
I think the Floyd case is, there's no else way to put it. It was just a horrific, tragic act that was, there's no way other to say it, that he was just murdered. That's what occurred in that case. And I wish somebody would have knocked that officer off of him, whether it was another officer that was standing there or a citizen. This is a very tough situation just to say, hey, if you see what you believe, your perspective, to intervene, you have to be careful about that because you might not know the whole picture when you walk into a situation. In that case, it's pretty apparent that we all wish somebody would have intervened and got involved. But with that said, if there's an officer just struggling with someone who just committed a domestic violence assault, or somebody that's highly intoxicated that just robbed somebody, or somebody armed, and we're struggling with them, we don't want a citizen to jump in the middle of that. One, out of safety for themselves, and they might not know the entire picture. So if they think there's some kind of wrongdoing happening, you call 911 and say, we need a supervisor out here. I think an officer's doing something that they shouldn't be doing. You can file a complaint, but I would love to say if there's a situation like George Floyd, and hopefully there is never another situation like George Floyd, that everybody get involved, intervene. But there's going to be a lot of situations that I'm fearful that people are going to think, I need to get involved in that. And maybe it's not something they need to get involved in that at that moment without knowing a full story. And I'll let Mike jump on top of that too.
Well, what I would add to that is document. The fact that was recorded on cell phone video, I think is very beneficial for all of us. And like the commander was saying, I would hate for somebody to not see the full context of a incident and then jump in and endanger themselves or put themselves in peril, whether from the suspect or from a police officer that was doing something wrong. but the fact that somebody was there to document that and show the world where they did something wrong is important.
Got it. All right, that's all questions I have related to community relations. The next group of questions relate to internal accountability within the department. So first question, if an officer commits a serious error, what is the disciplinary action?
Well, I mean, without knowing a specific scenario, it's hard to give that. But we have a wide-ranging disciplinary matrix, ranging from anywhere from an officer showing up late to not wearing his uniform correctly, all the way to serious misconduct. So you have anywhere from a counseling statement all the way up to termination. And just to kind of go into your next question about the 3 strikes, I mean, we really have, it can be 1 strike, you know, depending on what the violation is. You know, officers, just like everybody else, with any work, has due process. And we want to have an investigation and find out what all the facts are. But yeah, there's been several officers that have been arrested, several officers that have been terminated. There are several officers that have been terminated, but then got their jobs back because of the ALJ, judge advocate, or civil service as well. So it really depends on the scenario. But, you know, I've been involved in 2 cases as a detective in which I arrested one a police employee, the other one a police officer for misconduct. And I know there's been several over the years in which we find misconduct that we are accountable. And I think if you compare us to other departments across the country and you look at our OPA and the statistics, I think you'll find we're a pretty transparent and very highly accountable department. Mike, do you have anything else on that?
No, I don't. Actually.
Got it. Yes, so that answers the next 2 questions, being, you know, 3 strikes rule for terminating, and last time you reported fellow officer for unjust behavior. So they kind of answer all 3 of those.
And let me say something else to that. The last couple cases we had an officer that got fired for stealing a bottle of alcohol out of a DUI's car. The reason we found out about that is because another officer turned him in. We had an officer that got fired for when they went to an alarm call at a business, and there was water available to anybody that comes in there, more so customers, yes. But he took a bottle of water, and the other officer reported him. He got fired. We had an officer that saw a sergeant in a specialized investigations division, a narcotics division, that saw on a search warrant that he took some money. So we devised, as a department, a sting on him. And we found him to be stealing money on search warrants, and he was arrested, and he was prosecuted and convicted and lost his job, and he spent time in prison for it. So those are examples of where officers have reported wrongdoing, and they either led to termination, arrest, or both.
I remember 2 out of the 3 of those incidents when they happened. Yeah, they don't play.
Got it. All right. Next question. Does management look at officers who make a high percentage of resisting arrests?
Again, at the precinct level, we don't get a breakdown of the type of charges if I need to request one, but I will say this. We get a report, it's called a Human Resources Memorandum. And when we see, which red flags officers, and it red flags officers and brings them to my attention, and then I'll have the immediate supervisor do kind of an in-house investigation. And how you get red flagged is, you know, numerous sick days, late, the amount of use of force incidents you have. And usually if you have a resisting charge, you're going to have a use of force incident. So if you have those types of things, or you've been injured, or you're sick a lot, like I said before, you know, that generates a report that makes us internally kind of do an in-house investigation to see if there's any issues. And from those, we found wrongdoing. From those, we have found officers that are having some at-home problems in which we can get them referred to the appropriate type of services to help them. And sometimes we find out there's really nothing to it. So that's kind of an in-house system that we have to kind of red flag officers that we think may be in need or in trouble or may be involved in something they shouldn't be.
Got it. All righty. Next question. does the olive union hamper your ability in any way to fire an officer?
And I'm going to ask you a question on this.
Yeah, please.
Are we talking about the FOP? Because I'm not exactly sure what an olive union is.
Yeah.
I Googled it and couldn't find answers.
I'm going to assume it's like the union, the FOP. I'm going to assume it's that, the Fraternal Order of Police. The one thing different about Nashville, or the state of Tennessee, really, it's a right to work state. So yes, our FOP is involved in negotiations with the cities for pay and for different benefits and things of that nature. And yes, they will represent officers and they will provide legal assistance to officers that are accused of wrongdoing internally, policy-wise. And we work with them, but to be honest with you, they don't have as much strength. You hear a lot more about the strength of those unions in the Northeast, Chicago, Midwest, as opposed to down here. But yes, we will negotiate with them, we'll talk to them, but ultimately if an officer needs to be fired, they're going to get fired.
Next question. What's the holdup with body cams?
Well, again, I'm not part of those discussions, haven't been part of those discussions. I'm not involved with that at all. I know there's Captain Blaine Whited is involved in that now. I know there has been issues with procurement. I know this all started with Mayor Barry, then Mayor Briley, and now Mayor Cooper. So, you know, they're involved in it. I know council's been involved in it to a certain extent. The district attorney has been involved with it too, where he asked for a lot of money in order to implement the body cameras, and he needed a lot more resources. I know we said we were going to need a lot more resources because we were anticipating that there's going to be a heavy outcry, public records, to get footage or to get information about it. But outside of that, I would love to be able to give you more detail on it, but I am not part of that process. And Mike, if you had anything else, feel free to.
No, I think that it comes down to just the hierarchy of where our responsibilities lie, and here at the precinct level, as the commander said, we're not in those conversations, but we can certainly direct you to Captain Whited. He may have some more in-depth answers for that because he's over that specific program.
And the police department plays a pivotal role in that, absolutely. But I guess my point was, it's not just the police department involved in it. There are other entities involved in it outside of us, but we play a pivotal role in it, no doubt.
Got it. All right. Got a question from the chat. It is, has MNPD used training materials by David Grossman or others that teach the fear-based, quote unquote, warrior cop mentality?
Well, I'm not sure who that is, Grossman. You see the person that had the book Tactical Edge? If anybody knows that? I know that was a book that's been in question in the past. That was a book they had when I had it when I was in the academy. We don't use it anymore if that's the same person we're talking about. When you say that, but when you say the warrior based, you know, if you look at our cars, it says Nashville Guardians. And when you look at the 21st Century Policing Report when President Obama was in office, and it talked about Guardian versus Warrior, that's when we kind of shifted a focus on our officers. We've always been kind of the Guardian idea, but we went ahead and embraced it more by putting it on the cars, talking about it to officers, saying that, you know, obviously we want to be enmeshed in the community, not be us versus you. And that's what the Guardian mentality is versus the Warrior mentality. And I think you're seeing that across the country where more departments are trying to get away from the Warrior thing, get more into the Guardian thing. We've embraced that since the 21st Century Policing Report came out. And let me say this, because I just want to make sure it gets out there, because like I said before, I think an important part of the community is educating themselves on their department. And I think it's important for us to give you the information to know about it. Now, we're a CLIA accredited department. And what CLIA stands for is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. It's not just the United States, it's an international organization. And what they look at what are considered best practices and what departments are practicing those best practices, and are there policies, procedures, and how they operate, would they be considered that? Now, there's about 18,000 police departments in the United States. Only 726 are accredited. Now, that doesn't count university or college police departments. It doesn't include training academies or like dispatch centers. But there's 496 standards you have to meet to be CALIA accredited. And you have to hit 80% of those to actually make it. We have made those. I think we've been accredited for, I'd say for several, over 20 years. We've been considered a gold star standard department, which means we've hit every one of those standards, 496. So I just want people to understand when we look at, hey, is the department doing best practices? Yes, we're doing best practices based on what is considered best practices across the United States. And we've hit every one of the marks that an outside agency critiques each department on to find out if you meet those criteria. So I think we do a pretty good job of that. I don't know, Mike, do you have anything else?
Well, I had to go to Google and Wikipedia and look up Dave Grossman, and he looks like he's on quite the fringe extremist, that he's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. And I don't recognize any of his works, the bibliography that he's listed in, as anything I've ever seen in my career, which has spanned almost 20 years. So I feel very comfortable saying, no, we don't have anything influenced by David Grossman in our training.
Hey, Commander.
Sure.
Am I coming in?
Yeah, I got you.
Commander, this is Russell.
Hey, Russell.
When you speak of your credentials for that, is that for the East Precinct or is that for the Department of Nashville?
That's Nashville. That's for our department.
That's okay. So not just the precinct, but that's the citywide department has met those credentials of.
Yes, we are considered utilizing best practices as per CALIA. And we're also considered a tri-arc city, which means the police department's accredited, our training academy is accredited, and the Department of Emergency Communications, or what was formerly known as ECC, they are also accredited. And there's only a handful of departments across the country that have that. And there's only a handful of departments across the country that have met all those standards. So my point of saying that is we're not a department in crisis. We have, when I look at, like, there's several different departments that I've seen. I remember several years ago, Cleveland had a horrible incident where they had like 20 cars chasing somebody. And the people were unarmed and they were jumping on top of the car and shooting inside the car. It was just horrific. And then I looked at what their policy was, and they changed their policy. And this was, I'd say 6-7 years ago, maybe longer than that. But at that time, our pursuit policy had been in place for at least 20 years. And I couldn't believe that a city the size of Cleveland didn't have that policy in place already. And you see that a lot. You can't judge all police by one department.
Right.
You have to look. I would challenge everybody in the community to learn their department, understand what's going on in their city, and if there needs to be critiques made or changes made, I encourage it. Voice it. Talk to us about it. Have discussions like this. Have meetings like this. I mean, if you call, we'll come. I'll come to them. We'll talk about them. But I think you need to know what's going on in this city as compared to other ones, because we're not Minneapolis. We're not Atlanta. We're not Baltimore. We're us. That doesn't mean we're perfect. We make mistakes and we have blemishes. But I think we all need to understand what's going on here compared to other cities. Like I said, there's 18,000 departments. They're not equal. They're not equal in the state of Tennessee. Like Mike said earlier, I mean, our post commission for the state requires 480 hours of training. Our academy does 995.5 hours of training. So nearly double what's expected. So I think Mike and myself, we're open for criticism about it. We're willing to talk about it, but I just want to make sure people understand what our department is as opposed to other departments.
Yeah, I think just to break that down into math percentages, if you look at the commission, CALIA, which is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, the standard that we've met in Metro Nashville, we are one of only 4% of the national number of police departments that have met those standards. And I think 4% is a pretty substantial number. That doesn't mean we're perfect, just like the commander is saying. And I think it's absolutely critical that the neighborhoods and community leaders reach out to us and go, hey, we don't feel like these needs are being met. And without a doubt, we're going to sit down at the table and listen and work together to make those goals meet so that we're supplying the exact product that the community needs.
Got it. We got about 5 minutes left, so I asked you a couple more questions.
Sure.
But that one came through chat. So this one says, what is MNPD doing to address the alarming statistic that 40% of police officer families experience domestic violence compared to 10% of the general population?
Okay, see if I understand that correctly. You're saying that 40% of police officers' families experience domestic violence in the home as opposed to the general public? I don't know that stat. I haven't heard that. Do we have same issues as other families and have domestic issues? Absolutely. To say it's 40% of our department, I would say that sounds extremely high. I can find that out, and I can, Captain Michelle Richter is over our domestic violence unit. And I know we take domestic violence extremely seriously. You know, when there's just an allegation of domestic violence, you know, it gets investigated very thoroughly, and we put officers on administrative leave until it gets worked out. So that's something I can find out for you, but that number sounds high to me, but that might be a national statistic, but it sounds high for us. But I'll look at it and I'll ask Captain Richter and get back to you on it.
It appears these numbers are coming from the National Center for Women in Policing. If you want to do some more research, some more follow-up. So
sure, absolutely.
Yep. What's left, we have a question related to budget. I know you mentioned earlier, Sergeant, that might be kind of out of the scope of this meeting. Would you mind if I read them anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. First question: when are we going to support shifting money from police to support social workers, mental health services, rent assistance, drug and alcohol treatment, and after-school problems, all of which would actually address crime in the community?
Well, I'll say this. I don't think, as somebody who used to be a social worker, I was a Department of Children's caseworker for 3 years and investigated child abuse and sex abuse for the state of Indiana. So I've been a social worker before. You can't get enough of them. I think it's just like police. They're valued and not valued enough. But as far as the money that goes to that, as opposed to money that goes to us, I think that's better answered by Councilman Parker. We don't control the budget. You know, I know we submit a budget every year. But it's ultimately up to the mayor and the council to decide on what our budget will be.
Got it. Yeah, and the next two questions is kind of related to that as well. Just shift from police to other social services. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'd add this: 90, in my understanding, and I don't work in our fiscal department. I know what my budget is at East, but my understanding is 93% of our budget is personnel, whether it be salary and fringe. Only 7% is other things. So I know there's not, and our budget has been pretty, I know we got an increase in the new budget by $2 million, I believe. And I know there's money supposed to be going to a new horse barn for our mounted patrol. And I know our helicopters are in due of a lot of new parts and repairs. And I think some of the money was going to that. But we've had a pretty flat budget over the last few years. I know I've heard reports in New York City that their budget went up something like 22% over the last 2 years. Again, I would say everybody needs to get educated on their city, their department, their city finances, as opposed to just broad brush across the whole country. And maybe Councilman Parker can talk about that more, because I know he's been researching the budget since they've been working on that for the last.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sean, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about budget process?
Sure. Yeah. So, each department every year will submit a budget request, and departments have a lot of discretion to, manage the funds that they are allocated. The department head, and in this case, it's Chief Anderson, is the main person who oversees the budget for Metro Nashville Police as the director of the Metro Nashville Police. There's obviously a ton of conversation about shifting resources from policing and into like more supportive community services right now. I had an amendment that would have done a little bit of that. It did not get a ton of support. I think about a quarter of the council voted in favor of it. And then basically the amendment that wound up being sort of the most contentious of the night during the budget discussion was the $2.6 million that under the originally proposed Mendez plan would have gone for step increases for Metro employees, including firefighters and police. That wound up being allocated to the police department rather than to employee pay when all was said and done. And you know, I'm still kind of gathering the specifics of exactly what the breakdown was there. What the department said was that the 2.6 was needed to fund a new class of recruits, 48 people. As I think all are aware, the department is, Imhoff might be able to speak to Commander Imhoff might be able to speak to the precise number, 150 or so short of what is currently budgeted. Is that accurate, Commander Imhoff?
I think the last number I saw was 114.
Oh, okay. So not quite as bad, but yeah. So what the discussion ended up on was that, you know, that 2.6 was needed in order to bring these 48 new officers on, and I certainly understand that need. You know, I think that, and this is something that I personally struggle with as a council member, because people contact me about things that, you know, that there's a person in the neighborhood that clearly has, you know, mental health issues. Or there's an encampment in the neighborhood of unhoused people. And, you know, I sometimes am hesitant to say, let's call the police on this, because I think that can sometimes escalate situations. You know, some of these folks have existing trauma. Some of these folks are, you know, very difficult to reach if a plainclothes social worker approached them, you know. And so I think that the discussion that we're having is reflective of some needs in this city that are really unmet, and you know, I think too that you know, that we ask a ton of our police. Like I've got a friend who I was having a conversation with him, and he's on the force, and you know, he was telling me about, you know, responding to a pretty horrific incident. Right. And, you know, something that would just put me out of commission for a month. And I asked him, you know, what do you do after something like that? You know, do you go talk to somebody? Is there support for that? And he said, you know, you get back in the car and you go to the next call. And, you know, so we're asking folks to do such a wide breadth of things that, you know, maybe they are equipped and trained to do, but it's kind of that, you know, when somebody calls me about someone who's having mental health issues or someone who's, you know, a homeless encampment, like I'm hesitant to say, like, let's get the police involved in some cases. You know, I think that we need more supportive services, and we've got some nonprofits that are stepping up, and we've got, you know, some resources within the city, but it's just not enough. And I think that a lot of people are recognizing that. And I think that that's where a lot of this budget and resource allocation conversation is coming from.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit to that, and actually just transparency. I'm about to get a master's in mental health counseling in November after 4 years. One of the things that I think Sergeant Fisher's done a fantastic job with is looking at resources that we have available to us. When we hear about a homeless camp, we get Salvation Army down there, we get Park Center involved, we get social services from the mayor's office involved. And true, if everybody remembers the encampment we had a little over a year ago underneath Ellington Parkway, Sergeant Fisher went down numerous times. I went down with him a few times. And we were able to get everybody relocated, wherever they wanted to go. I know Sergeant Fisher and I gave one guy a ride up to Gallatin to family or friends. We gave people rides over to the Salvation Army, but we were able to get everybody out of that area, which we didn't want to arrest anybody. And guess what? We didn't arrest a single person. And when we get calls about mental illness, you know, we work very closely with Mobile Crisis. We work very closely with Mental Health Co-op. Michael Randolph, who's a supervisor over there, does a lot of the training for our negotiator team. So I'll get calls about, hey, there's a mental illness situation we have on XYZ Street. I know Mike's heard me call Michael Randolph over at Mental Health Co-op and Mobile Crisis. Say, hey, this is what we got. What do you recommend? What do you think we should do here? And we work with them on that. Now, granted, yes, it would be fantastic if we get people to go to those calls that we wouldn't have to go to those calls. And I'm not against that. But I do think we do a pretty good job, at least at East, of using the resources we know that are known to us and dealing with it. And I also think it's important to know that officers that do, like what you're saying, has gone to a horrific call to get help. We had a horrific call just last week. We had a 6-year-old boy over in Casey Place at a brand new apartment complex, Mosley on 6th, and they were playing with the automatic garage door opener, and the 6-year-old was grabbing the bottom of it, and he went all the way up into it, and last I heard was brain dead. And youth services is working that. We got what our behavioral health services, because officers were literally pulling that door down and get that little boy out of there to get him in the ambulance, fire and us. That same day, we knew it would be horrific for those officers to have to go to the next call, have to do something. We brought them all into the precinct. We called behavioral health services, which is the counseling division within the police department. We did a debriefing that day, and that's not uncommon. So just want to make sure people are aware of that we don't have officers go to horrific situations and just stick them back in the car and have them go to the next thing. We try to recognize those situations and get them the help they need immediately.
Yeah, and I would just want to add to that for you specifically, Sean, is that that reluctance to call the police. I would beg you to reach out to my office when there are community issues that you're. I think too often people look at calling the police means somebody's going to go to jail, and just like the commander just explained, that's not true. We worked tirelessly with every social resource that we could find for that homeless camp under Ellington. And just like the commander stated, we didn't arrest folks for that. We literally went above and beyond, I guess, the public expectations of police to find resources, find family, track people down. I actually was in contact with a family out of Alabama and coordinated them driving all the way up to get a 19-year-old that was living down there in a tent to make sure he was able to go home and was able to mitigate issues between his mom and dad and a stepmom so that he was able to go home and not be living in a tent under Ellington Parkway. So I don't think we could express it enough. We're begging you, sometimes when there's a problem, reach out to us. Just because we're the police doesn't mean that we're going to use handcuffs. We have got a huge Rolodex of resources that we're always willing to use. And that's the best case scenario.
And Councilman Parker's right. We might not be the best resource, but we'll try to get the best resource involved in it. So
right.
I would reach out to anybody that sees that. Just call us. We've gotten 50 Forward involved in calls. We've gotten adult protection services involved in calls, Park Center, Salvation Army, because we know we're not the experts at this stuff, but people call us. So Mike's done a fantastic job of getting to know the experts, at least in the East Nashville area, to try to get them involved in it.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate y'all's explanation of all that stuff. You know, I would say that just speaking to the, you know, I've worked in fields, nothing like policing, but where, you know, the motto is to just kind of suck it up and toughen up. And, you know, I think that I know that culture probably exists in policing as well.
Sure.
And so I don't know how we can change sort of the culture around, like, if, again, some kind of call that someone responds to is something that's probably they shouldn't be out the rest of the day or something, you know. I don't know how we can change that and make officers more comfortable with saying, like, okay, like I need to go in, I need to go talk to somebody or something. and anything we can do to kind of support that, I think would.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is this mentality, especially when I came on the department, there was this mentality, you don't go to behavioral health services, you don't go get help. It looks weak. I would say our behavioral health services with Dr. Carol Harp, as well as David Kennington, who's a licensed therapist, I think they've done an extremely good job of where they need to continue to hire more therapists because it's being utilized so much. And I think it's incumbent upon us as supervisors to realize when somebody's been on a call that they need to sit down. And that's what happened in this case with the little boy, that the supervisors realize these guys don't need to go on another call today. They need to come back to the precinct. We need to get somebody in here and talk to them. It's sometimes, we need to protect officers from themselves because they're going to want to say, I'm good, I'm okay. And we as supervisors need to do a better job sometimes of saying, nope, we need to do a timeout on you right now. We need to get you debriefed and get you involved in any kind of counseling services that are necessary. I would like to say one thing. I saw one question didn't get asked, and I want to make sure that we cover it just really quickly, if that's okay.
Yep.
This was on the can you institute the 8 components of Campaign Zero?
Yeah, that was my last question, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I saw them. Every one of these, whether it's ban, chokeholds, strangleholds, require de-escalation. I'm doing this for time's sake because I know we're almost done.
Yeah, for sure.
Require warning before shooting. Exhaust all other means before shooting. Duty to intervene. Ban shooting at moving vehicles, which in our policy, it's not only is it banned shooting at moving vehicles, it's banned shooting at moving vehicles or from moving vehicles. Require a use of force continuum. Require comprehensive reporting. I know Mike had sent Sarah Beth an email with tons of links. Every one of these has already been established in our policies. We don't teach chokeholds or strangleholds. They are not authorized. We do require de-escalation, and when we're at the academy, they get 12 hours of de-escalation, and we get more training on it each year. When feasible, require warning before shooting. And the reason it says when feasible is because if you have a Parkland shooting incident or one like in Las Vegas, sometimes it's not feasible to give a warning, hey, I'm the police, stop shooting folks. We have to act immediately based on the circumstances around us. But yes, we do have it in our policy to warn before shooting. Exhaust all other means before shootings. Yes, we have a force continuum that we have to go up and down based on the threat in front of us, if there is even a threat. So yes, we have that in our policy. Multiple places within our policies talk about duty to intervene. It talks about regarding misuse of force. Again, the banning shooting at moving vehicles, that's in the policy. Our force continuum has been in our policy since I came on in '93. And comprehensive reporting. Anytime an officer uses force or somebody complains of injury or makes a complaint about force, we have to investigate it. It's called a 108 form. And even if we're chasing a suspect, let's say, and they get injured while they're running, they run into a tree, fall over a fence, and they have an injury because of them running, we have to do a use of force investigation and document that, send supervisors out there, get interviews done. So yes, every one of those points, and I'm happy to answer anything individually about those, but I just want to make sure that those have all been in our policies and been in our policy for some time. That's one of the reasons that we hit every one of those marks that Kalia asked us to hit, is because we have those things. So with that said, just want to make sure we didn't skip over that. And if anybody has any questions about that, Mike and myself are happy to answer them.
Right. And the email with all the links, Sarah, I wanted to listen to this conversation tonight to see if I needed to add any more links. I've got that saved. That's going out to you tomorrow. I would please ask that you share that on the community page. And that way anybody, because a lot of those questions is information that's publicly available, but you just got to know where to look for it. And so I understand why folks might not have known where to look for those answers. But we want to make sure that we share all of those answers with anybody who's curious, and then also reiterate the fact, like the commander's saying, please reach out to us anytime you have questions. It doesn't take a Zoom meeting. It doesn't take a community meeting. Y'all know where we are. We're right there in Trinity. You know our emails. Fire us a note. Anytime you got a question, concern, or just going, hey, how come this or how come that? We're always.
If you have a question about what we're talking about here tonight, and you didn't want to ask it on Zoom, call us tomorrow. I'll be happy to answer it.
Yep.
And I'll be sure to share both of your emails on the page after this so that if they want to reach out directly to you after this, they can too. So,
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Justin, is that all of our questions?
That is all of our questions. Commander Sergeant, thank you for this time. This was
Thank you.
great. Councilman, thanks for your input as well. It's very helpful. Turn it back over to you, Sarah Beth.
Okay, well, yeah, that's all of our time today. Again, like you said, I'll post your emails. I'll let everybody know how to get in touch with you. Jim, thank you so much for hosting us tonight. I really appreciate it. And if you'll get that recording over to me, I will get it up on our Facebook page. So thanks everybody for participating. We'll see y'all again soon.
Thank you.
All right,
Good to see everybody again.
Good to see you, Sam.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.